Good evening and welcome. You are watching The Big Story on NDTV Profit and I'm Nupur Talwar Suri. On The Big Story this evening, we look at how sudden policy changes by countries such as Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the United Kingdom and others have altered the international landscape for students who are looking to study abroad. Now, these abrupt changes have essentially made students rethink their priorities in terms of whether they really want to study abroad and the costs that are involved. We'll get you more on this on The Big Story this evening. All right. In fact, we have a report that's coming in from Juhika, who now takes us through the changes that have been made.
If you are a student looking to study abroad next year, then you're in for some bad news. Canada, the UK, Australia, Poland, and New Zealand, which are the most sought-after study destinations, are cutting or have already cut their international student intake and are making stricter rules for visa applications. Canada, a favorite among students with a potential for permanent residency, has left them in a lurch. Indian students in Canada were protesting last week after the government announced new policies that are aimed at reducing the number of permanent residency nominations by 25%. The Canadian government is also looking at a 35% cut in student visa approvals. This leaves about 70,000 Indian students at the risk of deportation. Australia has also capped its international student enrollment number for 2025 at 270,000. It has hiked its student visa fees to 1,600 Australian dollars and made the English language requirement stricter. Neighbouring New Zealand has doubled its student visa fees from the 1st of October after witnessing a massive influx of international students last year. Let's now look at the United Kingdom, the country with second most number of sponsored dependents from India. At the start of this year, the UK barred international students from bringing their families into the country. This rule, however, does not apply to the students studying in a research program or on a government-funded scholarship. Meanwhile, Poland tightened its rules and said that those without high school diplomas will not be given student visas. This comes after the local reports suggested that some foreign nationals were using their student visas to work in the Schengen area. These abrupt policy changes have left several students uncertain about their ambitions of studying abroad and also thrown up the question of whether the huge financial cost is worth it.
Well, joining us to discuss this further is Vibha Kagzi, the founder and CEO of ReachIV.com, and Aditya Mishra, the MD of CIEL HR Services. Good evening, both of you, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for doing this.
Vibha, to you first. Now, Vibha, visa policies, of course, are being tightened by various countries, as you saw in our report over there. Now, this obviously is causing a great deal of anxiety among Indian students. Do you think that the wider landscape may be changing, or do you see this more of a blip on that radar?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, we've seen this happen over the last 15, 20 years. There'll be a geopolitical tension. You saw it happen with US-China relationships. You're seeing it happen with India and Canada. This is sort of par for the course, and this is going to continue. What happens when there are these blips is you see a shift in the student population moving to different geographical locations. As of now, the United States has opened up its borders, right? Everyone knows Donald Trump issued a statement saying, along with your admission acceptance letter, I'm going to hand out a green card to you. Now, this is obviously a political ploy on his part and whatever, but it still reflects the direction in which he will take policy, if not issue a green card, at least facilitate Indian applicants to get work visas. So I feel like it's just a reordering of the geopolitical system. Depending on tensions, everything gets reordered and then some sort of normalcy settles back with the US, UK, Spain, Germany, France, New Zealand, Australia, etc. There's a whole world out there. So I think these tensions are par for the course, and you're just going to see a reshuffling of the overall study abroad landscape.
Aditya, is that something that you agree with, that these policy changes that, appear to be aimed at controlling migration and perhaps to a large extent managing the internal constituency are going to be not so permanent? Or do you think that there perhaps could be long-term repercussions of this?
No, I think these are all driven by their internal compulsions, and these are sort of come in waves in some way, So there is a little bit of a wave of protectionism right now. Hence, we see that various countries are trying to tighten, at least trying to control the narrative that this is how it is going to work. Of course, this creates a lot of disturbance for especially the families in India and the students in India, those who have certain kind of aspiration and looking for a kind of a global citizenship in some way. So I think this is temporary. This will go away. However, this temporariness could be, for 2 years, 3 years, and it really impacts the student community in a significant way.
You say, that, Aditya, you say that this is likely to be temporary, perhaps another couple of years. But what about people who are already studying there? Now, sudden policy changes can essentially shake your confidence. They can leave people at home wondering whether it was the right decision or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And because this education is sort of expensive, many of them will have financial commitments back home, and the families would have sort of got into significant amount of debts in some cases. So servicing that will become a challenge. After studying, getting a job there will become a challenge. So many aspects are there. However, the fact is, India is such a young country, and the demand for foreign education is not going to go away, even if they're very expensive at this point in time. So this is pure economics. And this is unfortunate. What we are seeing, one is the foreign, the currency arbitrage. Another is the image of having studied abroad. These two things are kind of working tremendously. Add to that the third dimension of the local political or the geopolitical issues. So these three are kind of, unfortunately, today weighing down heavily on all our minds.
Right. Vibha, you were, of course, talking to us of how you feel that this is not going to have a permanent sort of an impact. But look at, for instance, what has happened in the UK. Now, new restrictions, of course, include tighter rules on post-study work visas. Don't you think in that scenario, it makes it more challenging for graduates to remain in the UK? And obviously, by extension, it does throw up the question of whether it's worth the expense, because a large number of these students may just have to return to India.
Yeah, it's a great question. Firstly, what I'm seeing is like a little bit of cleaning up, right? The countries are just want to be careful about the quality of students that they retain within the border. So I think this is honestly a positive move. If there was an influx of people coming into India, we'd also want some sort of filtration process. So I think what they're doing is setting up borders and filters. When Poland says you need to have minimum a high school degree to then retain within our borders, I think it's a pretty sensible move on their part, right? You want at least a high school degree before you can migrate and move to Poland. Similarly, if the UK is putting down some rules and policies, it's all done from a perspective of just sort of cleansing up the system. You have to remember that foreign exchange from India moving to these countries is big business, right? $60 billion went to the United States alone from India. So we're talking about very high stakes for the governments as well when they make these decisions. This is not just a matter of saying, hey, let's close the borders. It's always a give and take. There's a cost-benefit analysis done to these decisions. Also, the argument also can be made is like, if I don't end up going to the UK, where will I go? Will I stay back in India? And is in the India option a reasonable enough option for me? And also, is the Indian economy now moving at such a rate that it's now going to absorb, and we're going to see a reverse human migration back into India? So maybe I go to Oxford, get my undergraduate degree, and now because Amazon and Google and all of them have set up offices in India, will the Indian economy now be able to absorb me back into the system? And we are seeing waves of that change happening as well.
Right, so you're looking at this more like housekeeping measures that have been put in place by these governments, not essentially, wanting to stop the extremely skilled student who could be looking at a job abroad or to move perhaps into other European countries. Now, that's, per se the case for the United Kingdom. But Vibha, every student doesn't make it to an Oxford or a Cambridge. So that is a very limited number that we are talking about in place. But give us more details on what are the other countries that now become more attractive, because if, say, a Canada and Australia change their policies, there will be other countries who would want that capital in a sense to move.
Yeah, so as I said in the beginning, I think the US is being very, very open just currently, given the political scenario in the US. As you know, a lot of this is driven from a political standpoint with the elections coming up in the vote banks. But the US is sending out very positive signals, which it didn't send out 3 years ago. So as I was saying, this is an interplay and it's a wave, right? Things come in waves and move in waves. The current wave seems like the US is now opening up. And the US, as we know, is the most developed study abroad market in the world. If the US opens up its borders, then we see a large shift of students moving to the US. And the UK also is not completely closing its borders. Neither is Poland, neither is New Zealand. They're just putting in some stringent measures. If you meet those measures, you're still welcome to come into these countries. So I don't see this as like, okay, we're closing, we're moving to protectionism, our borders are now closed. I think it's, as you said, the housekeeping, the cleansing, and we see a shift maybe to the US, perhaps people coming back to India, knowing that once we graduate, I have a home back in India. And really, that's the hope that the Indian economy is able to now sustain and pick up and start absorbing some of our human capital back into our. So we'll see some sort of reverse migration trends picking up very soon.
All right. So the US is one country, but Aditya, what are the others that are looking to absorb these students apart from the US? Because the US education still is quite expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think US education is expensive, and of course, Canada, Australia, UK, and even, so many, when this Ukraine-Russia crisis happened, we discovered that so many people from India have gone to places like Ukraine to study medicine or engineering. There are people moving to China. I mean, that's a surprise, but people are moving. So that's the point that I was trying to say, that in India, still the demand and the attraction of having studied abroad continues to remain strong. And when on one hand the economies around the world are becoming a little tighter for work permits and jobs there after you graduate out of a university, India is still kind of opening up in certain way, in the sense that entrepreneurship as an opportunity is becoming bigger and bigger in India as well. So that's another thing which is probably working in the minds of people, that even if I don't get a job in the UK or in US or in Australia or Canada, wherever I'm going to, I will come back to India and maybe start a new business because I would have got a global exposure. So that's another line of thinking that I'm seeing, that young people and their family members holding that thought as well quite clearly. So that's the second thing that I see. And thirdly, that I see is a new kind of a sort of a spirit, or a kind of a upheaval of a new idea that even Indian universities, can they become global? Like Indians are queuing up for US or UK or any of those countries for a global education or studying abroad. Why can't colleges and universities in India be able to offer similarly attractive courses? Can we not have educators or professors here who are like globally the best? so that we are able to attract people from different countries. And India becoming a hub, like today, many of us are proud to see that India turning as a medical tourism hub. Can it be an education hub as well? One of the global hubs, like US is such an attractive place for education. So similarly, why can't India be? So that's again another dimension which is coming up, which is the reverse of what we are discussing. But I thought I'll just mention that.
Aditya, in fact, that was going to be my next question. How do we turn this into an opportunity for India? How do Indian universities, and there are many private universities as well that are now mushrooming, how do they turn this into an opportunity? And do we as a country not have enough talent to keep our students back home and B, become a global hub? What's the way forward for that?
No, I think, yeah, absolutely. We have to actually expand our horizon. We have to change our thinking, the mindset. It's good that this idea has been seeded in the recent past. A newfound confidence has been found amongst the entrepreneurs who are running universities in India. And there is a thinking of global tie-ups, professors coming here for short-term courses, and there has to be certain degree of revamping of our education system, certain kind of repositioning of what India as a country has to offer. All that has to happen. The only challenge that we will have for the next many years is probably the job opportunities. If somebody from a UK or from Spain or France has to come to India to study here, after they complete the study, working in India is not going to be attractive. So they are going to just come to India to study and be happy that they studied in a university which is equivalent of an Oxford or a Stanford or a Harvard or whatever, some of the best in the world. So I think that's the direction in which Indian higher education system needs to move. And similarly on the vocational education, there has been some movement. Technical education, there has been some movement, but that's minuscule. There is a lot more that India has to offer, and we need to really work on that.
Right, Vibha, any thoughts on that? Because obviously we do have the talent. We do have the mindset, and there are a lot of Indian students who would want to avoid that uncertainty. So do you think that Indian universities can attract and retain those students? What are the steps that they need to take?
It's a great question, and obviously this is already happening in some capacity, right? You are seeing OP Jindal College of Law, you're seeing Flame in Pune, you're seeing Ashoka in Sonepat, you're seeing Plaksha. So you're seeing these independent colleges mushrooming slowly but surely. The sector still remains very, very highly regulated. So if the government really wants to push this has to be a thrust by the government saying, we want more private sector dollars invested in this sector, let's open up the sector. Because currently, given the current supply crunch, there's not enough seats for the top talent here in India. As you know, about 14 lakh people applied for JEE, and the IITs have a less than 0.5% acceptance rate. And how do you get into IIT? Only on the basis of one entrance test. When you apply abroad, you need to send in essays, financial aid, resume, you'll be interviewed. But just the quantum of people applying to Indian colleges doesn't allow for a sophisticated application process. 2 years ago, St. Stephen's had a cutoff of 99.5%. Why do they have a 99.5% cutoff? Just because the quantum of people applying. So very large supply already of Indian students, let alone people from Germany or Spain coming into our borders. I think that might even create a bit of an outrage where we say we don't even have enough seats for our own people. But if they have to open this up, then they need to strategically, in an organized fashion, regulate the sector, open it up. Even foreign universities want to enter India, right? Abu Dhabi has opened up. There's a Carnegie Mellon campus in Abu Dhabi. Singapore has opened up for Yale, MIT collaborations. if India really wants to be able to cater just to the Indian population first, we need to open up the sector, allow for foreign universities to set up base, and invest in private-public partnerships wherein the government and private sector companies let the Tatas and the Ambanis and the Birlas of India put in large quantum of money and set up not one Ashoka and one flame, but 50 Ashokas and 50 flames to then really start absorbing this supply while maintaining a high quality threshold. If they're able to do that, then we can start retaining some of our talent here in India and not worry about geopolitical tensions. I feel like India's always at the mercy of the US, UK, New Zealand, Australia saying, what are they going to do now? And say, what's going to happen to our student population? If they can really just think about this at a macro level and say, why don't we just retain our talent in-house? And what are steps we need to take towards doing that?
Absolutely. That's a great point you make, Vibha. But there are a lot of students who actually go abroad, Vibha, looking for very specific courses. Do you think that Indian universities perhaps also need to expand the curriculum a bit and look at those specifics that students are leaving the Indian soil to study?
It's a very, very good question. Not only are the quality and the quantity of majors on available record at foreign universities, but you also have the ability to go in and curate your own degree. As a student, when I went for my undergrad in the US, I could talk to my advisor and say, hey, can we blend some courses in finance, computer science, and operations research and create a major that I'm interested in? So it allows for that degree of flexibility. As we know, when you apply to the IITs, basis your ranking, you are just tossed into an engineering department. So the cream of IIT entrance goes to computer science. And then even if you're in the top 0.5% of India's elite, you might be studying metallurgy or like a completely random department, right? So there's no choice. Forget the richness in the quantity of options. You don't even have a choice of which department you've been tossed into. So the system is flawed at that level. So let alone curating a range of majors and minors, right? The ability to focus in one, take a minor in maybe focus on math, minor in music and theater, maybe double major where you get 2 different degrees. Universities in the West will allow you to get parallelly a degree from the theater school and from the computer science school. So I could be a computer scientist with a flair for theater. In India, though, that option is completely off the table, because it's one degree, one system, and you sort of go in through and you graduate through it. So there's no interdisciplinary mindset whatsoever. But I think it's very much needed. It's happening with the IB schools. It's happening with the Cambridge curriculum at the high school level. The CBSE, ISC, all the curriculums in India also starting to pick up threads and shreds from Cambridge and IB. And if you're going to see that happening at the high school level, most certainly students are going to demand this at the college level as well. So I think we have a lot of work to do with the higher education and definitely increase A, the supply, and B, then the majors and minors on the menu card.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Aditya, any thoughts on that? Because what Vibha is talking about is a particular kind of flexibility that these colleges abroad offer you. And unfortunately for India, we are still very stuck in an old education system, which is only just beginning to update now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is not only the choice of courses and the admission methods, the process in which we choose students, the kind of freedom that we offer to students to craft their career, the way we educate, we provide information to students and their influencers while the students are there in their high school about possibilities. All of these need a revamp. Also, the way the course, the curriculum is imparted is so very different in India compared to what some of the global best do. So there is a gap in pedagogy itself. So there are a lot of things that we need to work, and that's why I just use the word revamp. So we need a revamping of multiple things in our education system, and probably in 10 years, India will be proud of having a few global institutes like all of us have a very, respectful way of addressing some of the global best institutes. So India probably will have some of it if that revamping is done. And at the same time, we need to reposition our education system, our institutes globally, so that we actually become a global center of repute.
Absolutely, and this is something that we can certainly start by doing, at least for the Indian subcontinent, at least have students coming in from the Indian subcontinent. But both of you, thank you very much for joining in on The Big Story. Vibha as well as Aditya, it was great to see you both on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Nupur.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So with that, it is a wrap on The Big Story, but it does leave us with questions as to how India can now become a global hub for education. Perhaps that might be the second phase of what India will have to do. The first one will be to actually be able to absorb a lot of that student intake that's coming out now. The visa policy changes that we see globally may be short term, but this time for India to use this to its advantage. Thank you very much for joining in on The Big Story on NDTV Profit. But news and updates continue, so stay with us.